futurista, um pensador. Ele criou a série original Shots of All, que explora tópicos de tecnologia, inovação, criatividade, transhumanismo, saúde mental. Seus vídeos recebem centenas de milhões de visualizações, uma plataforma digital. Ele está aqui para discutir a transformação digital que está varrendo a nossa humanidade, a natureza das mudanças e por que a gente deve permanecer muito otimista em relação ao futuro. Eu tenho muita honra de convidar o palco do Experience Club e pedir a todos uma salva de palmas. JASON Silva, welcome.
Disruption and thinking a lot about exponential change and thinking a lot about how we can leverage exponential change to impact the world in a positive way. And you know, change is scary. With change always comes uncertainty, but I think we also have a unique opportunity in human history to leverage the transformations that we're seeing, again, to make this a better world. So, let's get into it. Show that in a way went viral across the world. It resonated with audiences because it illustrated in a counterintuitive way the ways in which our brain interprets the world, right? Also the ways in which the brain misperceives reality. We have a lot of cognitive loopholes and shortcomings that inform our perception of the world. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are through a prism of expectations and cognitive biases. And this is very much playing out with the coronavirus as well, I believe. But we'll get into that with technology and innovation and disruption. And that's the journey that I want to take you guys on today. For human creativity. It begins with a passion for human imagination, right? This capacity to imagine, to design, and to create. And this passion for creativity and imagination has turned into a passion for technology. Because I believe that technology is the embodiment of human imagination in the world. I believe that technology is the literalization of human creativity in the world, right? I believe that technology is how we turn the human mind inside out, how we exteriorize the contents of our mind in the world, how we literally impregnate the world with the contents of our minds. Technology as a scaffolding of the mind, a scaffolding of the mind that extends our thoughts, our reach, and our vision. And this has always been the case. There is historical precedent for this, right? As the philosopher Marshall McLuhan famously wrote, we build the tools, but then the tools build us. We've been in a symbiotic relationship with technology since the dawn of humanity. If you go back 100,000 years to the savannas of Africa, when the first humans were crawling around and they picked up a stick on the ground and they used that stick to reach a fruit that was on a tree branch they couldn't reach with their hands alone, we've been using our tools, right? We've been using our instruments, our sticks, to extend our reach, to overcome our boundaries. Our tools and technologies have always become our second skin, our extended phenotype, right? Again, we discover or we build the tool, and then the tool builds us. It transforms us. It expands our sphere of possibility. Making animal. To be human is to be transhuman, the creature that transcends its limitations and expands its boundaries. Now fast forward to 2020, right? Billion-dollar companies emerge from nowhere and billion-dollar companies can disappear just as quickly. There's a kind of vertigo that we are experiencing today. It's a dizzying amount of transformation that often hijacks our fear response, the amygdala in the brain, right? We are wired to respond fearfully to uncertainty, and the pace of change today, no doubt, awakens feelings of uncertainty. That's not always a good thing, but the fact is that technology has always upended the world. Technology has always transformed what it means to be human, right? From the development of the wheel, right, to harnessing fire for the first time, to the car, the airplane, television, radio, the internet. We've had technologies in the past that have drawn a line in the sand, and after we crossed that line, humanity was a different place. So this idea that technological change is changing the world and what are we going to do is a story that we've experienced before, right? Where it's this constant feeling of like, oh, what are we going to do? When zooming out and getting the big picture perspective shows us that actually we're going to do what we've always done, which is expand our sphere of possibility. But the disruptions we're seeing today are the disruptions of the past. And I would say the only difference is that these disruptions in the past didn't happen as fast as they're happening now. So they accrued over many generations. So in the past, you were born and you died in a world that maybe saw one transformative innovation. The world didn't change that much within a generational gap. And so, well, hell, the new generation was born in a new world and they adapted to it. But today it's different, because today the changes are happening in real time and within our own lifespans. And so it's a lot more for us to take cognitively. It's a lot more change and a lot more uncertainty and a lot faster. One metaphor in nature, you can't really see a tree grow, right? That kind of rate of change exists outside of our nervous system. The only way to see a tree grow and have agency and aim towards the sun is with time-lapse photography. And all of a sudden, you transcend the limitations of your nervous system and you see that there's all this change happening. So you might think of what's happening today as a time-lapsing of reality, a time-lapsing of information technological change. Information technology has slingshotted us into a time where we're living inside of a time-lapse movie. But why? No doubt you've heard it before if you're familiar with Ray Kurzweil, Peter Diamandis, Singularity University, or even when Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel magazine, coined Moore's Law. But basically, digital transformation, digital technology changes at an exponential rate. But human beings are linear thinkers. This is the cognitive bias that prevents us from making sense of what's happening. Because we still have a brain that evolved in a linear and local world. And now we're trying to contend with a global and exponential world. That's the cognitive dissonance. And you can intellectually understand, sure, yeah, Moore's Law exponential, but your intuitions about change are still linear. You know, when you're home at dinner with your kids, or when you're thinking about your life over the next 5 or 10 years, your intuitions govern how you think. And your intuitions are linear. And you bring that linear bias into your work. And you bring that linear bias when you're making projections about the future. But that linear bias makes you future blind. It literally is a lens of perception that distorts your capacity to take advantage of what's happening. Because again, your intuitions continue to be linear in an exponential world. So what's like the quickest way? Kurzweil, he's a genius. Bill Gates referred to him as the best human being alive today at predicting the future. He wrote a book called The Singularity is Near, When Humans Transcend Biology. This book shook me up and changed my whole perspective on the world. In fact, Kurzweil is now the head of engineering at Google. And he has this example that he uses in the book and has used in his speeches, and I was like, oh my God, linear steps, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By step 30, you're at 30, right? So 30 linear steps gets us to 30. That's intuitive to us. Because 100,000 years ago, there was a lion across the savannah and it was going to run towards us. We were making a linear calculation of how quickly it was going to get to us and eat us. Again, we're wired for linearity. But here's the kicker. if you take the same 30 steps, those exact same 30 steps, but you take them exponentially, you get to 1 billion. Right? This is the part that always gives me pause, and I've used this example 1,000 times. 30 linear steps gets you to 30, but 30 exponential steps gets you to 1 billion. And if you think about the entire digital technological world we live in being governed by these exponential rates of change, that's the reason why the smartphone in your pocket today, get this, is 1 million times cheaper. For those that say, oh, these technologies are only for the rich. The smartphone in your pocket today is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than what used to be a $60 million supercomputer that was the size of this building 40 years ago. In your pocket that is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and yet 1,000 times more powerful. That's exponential change. For anybody who doubts human progress, who doubts human ingenuity, that example alone should give us pause. Mic drop. But here's the thing. Exponentials aren't slowing down, and they haven't slowed down. Doesn't matter if there's been economic downturns, or war, or scandal, or pandemics. These trends continue, almost like they have a life of their own. And so in the next 25 years, the smartphone will shrink down to a device in your pocket. Actually, will shrink down to a blood cell-sized device. From a device in your pocket to a blood cell-sized device, interfacing directly with our bodies and brains. There's a reason why Elon Musk is already putting his bets on brain-machine interfaces. Because Silicon Valley understands this, right? Sometimes it takes unique personalities to understand exponential change, and that's why our bodies and brains. With artificial intelligent algorithms in blood cell-sized devices in our bodies and brains. How will this change the world? How has this already changed the world? A young kid in Brazil with a smartphone has better communications technology than a president had 25 years ago. Again, Bill Clinton had a Time magazine cover story, I think it was a decade ago, called The Case for Optimism. And in it he cited a United Nations study that found that the cell phone was the greatest invention in history to pull people out of poverty. Now think about that. That was a decade ago. Again, a young kid in Africa with a smartphone, better communications technology than a head of state had 25 years ago. The tools to change the world in everybody's hands. The supercomputers of yesterday in everybody's hands. The Library of Alexandria in everybody's hands. Stephen Johnson, fabulous New York Times bestselling author, he wrote a book called Where Good Ideas Come From. It's a natural history of innovation. He maps all these transformative innovations that changed humanity. And he has this chapter. The adjacent possible is what exists in the perimeters of possibility. And he describes the adjacent possible as a shadow from the future. I'll show you as I continue my remarks. But to set up the first video is an anthem on the human capacity to overcome our boundaries, because this is more than just intellectual understanding. This is an emotional reconfiguration that I'm inviting you today. I'm inviting not just your minds, but your hearts to become invested in the ways that the human enterprise can be leveraged to impact humanity in a positive way.
Shakespeare, in which he says, "We know what we are, we know not what we may be." And in the age of accelerating technologies in which we extend the cognitive reach of our mind, the perimeters of our humanness with these extensions of self, these exoskeletons, these technological scaffoldings, the wings of our aircrafts and the signals traveling through our smartphones, sending our thoughts electrified at the speed of light across oceans of sky. We redefine and extend what it means to be human. Edward O. Wilson says, we have actually decommissioned natural selection, and now we must look deep within ourselves and decide what we wish to become. We are now the chief agents of evolution. We have reverse engineered the software of biology and are about to rewire and upgrade and redefine what it is to be a Homo sapien. Juan Enriquez uses the term Homo evolutus, the being that evolves itself, that transforms itself, right? Ray Kurzweil, we didn't stay in the caves. We haven't stayed on the planet. Biology, just another membrane to be transcended. You know, Marvin Minsky used to say, will robots inherit the earth? Yes, they will, but they will be our children. You know, I love this idea because we hear the term transhumanism, and what it means to be human is to be transhuman. We are the species that transforms and transcends. We never stopped. We always did. It's what we are.
So basically, I wanted to make exponential thinking go viral, right? Because me, born from the primordial soup of human culture, this is what James Glick has written about. You know, memes leap from brain to brain. They have retained the properties of organisms. They have infectivity and they have spreading power. And even though these memes, these ideas are not made of nucleic acid, ideas can change the world, or they can destroy the world. I think what we're seeing with the coronavirus is a great example of the virality of panic. I think that we're seeing the virality of panic have more of a negative impact on the world than the virus itself. And that's an example of the dark side of social media in a world that traffics in ideas where if it bleeds, it leads. But the point is the unique opportunity we have to steer Spaceship Earth towards the place we want to be at. So I started doing these videos. Many of them received millions and millions of views, and I found myself on stages across the world just basically telling people why I found this stuff so compelling, which to me is a no-brainer, honestly. Right? Terence McKenna describes human beings as the coral reef-like animal, the extruder of technological material. We take in matter of low organization, it goes through the filters of the mind, and we extrude space shuttles and iPhones. I mean, that's what's actually going on. Sometimes you have to zoom out to see what we're capable of. We think things into being. David Deutsch, in his book, The Beginning of Infinity, this is a wonderful example where he talks about, and that when seen through the right lens, that's a topography in which the forces of creativity and intentionality and commerce have trumped the forces of geology. So the human mind, human enterprise, has become a force that is more powerful than geology. That's a real thing. And with it comes a real responsibility, right? People accept the narrative because they've seen it, right? They've seen their smartphones get more powerful. They've seen computers shrink down. But what often people say is, okay, that's ones and zeros, that's digital transformation. But what about the world of, biology and atoms and concrete? There's a real physical instantiation, and that doesn't move exponentially, right? Wrong. I don't know if you guys read this article a couple of years ago that went viral. More true than we think. So, two emerging exponential technologies that are an example of software eating the world are biotechnology and nanotechnology. So biotechnology means mastering the information processes of biology. Because it turns out that biology is software. It turns out we are made of code. It turns out we are alphabetic all the way down. It turns out our genes are little software programs. This is not a metaphor. And our capacity to manipulate, to program and reprogram the software of life itself is advancing exponentially. Just as one example, gene sequencing, the speed at which we can sequence our genes is actually advancing 3 times faster than exponentially. That's why we're going to very soon move from Silicon Valley to the biology valley. That's why Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, started Calico, the California Life Extension Company, a software company for biology. That's why Time Magazine gave him a cover story called Google and the End of Death. That's why synthetic biology and programmable biology is going to democratize healthcare and disrupt healthcare in ways that we can barely imagine. It's interesting to see the presidential debates in the United States about health care for all and how expensive it is and how we can't afford it. And nobody there is talking about exponentials. Nobody there is talking about the fact that eventually those old paradigms of how we treat our health are going to be completely obsolete. Healthcare is going to be as disruptive, right? As disrupted as digital transformation has disrupted the world up until this point. That's a smartphone-sized device called a medical tricorder that can be deployed in a rural village, for example, and diagnose people better than 10 board-certified doctors. Now imagine the possibilities there, right? Or quantified self-revolution, right? When miniature sensors are put in our bodies and brains, giving us real-time access to our biological data. Freeman Dyson, the eminent physicist who recently left us at the age of 95, he wrote an essay called The Age of Wonder. And he talked about a new age of biology. And I quote, "Where a new generation of artists will be writing genomes with the fluency that Blake and Byron wrote verses." It gives you a lot to think about, right? It's a very beautiful metaphor, but the idea is that when biology becomes the new canvas for human creativity and artistry, we won't just be able to address illnesses in ways we haven't before, potentiating the end of cancer, or as Bill Gates once said, maybe reverse engineering or genetically modifying mosquitoes so they inoculate you against malaria instead of giving you malaria. I mean, these are just some examples of what's possible. But imagine a world where self-determination takes on a whole new dimension. Today people express themselves with clothing or with tattoos. In the future, they might decide to speciate. People might want to modify their genome as a way of expressing their unique personality. But the point is, the opportunities for disruption, the opportunities for transformation, the opportunities to redefine what it means to be human are all of a sudden within our grasp. This is a real thing. This is not just science fiction. This is stuff that people, high net worth individuals in Silicon Valley are pouring funds into. Life form. He also decoded the human genome, I believe. Craig Venter was asked, "Do you worry that you're playing God?" And he said, "Who's playing?" Which I thought was kind of funny. It's a unique responsibility in human history because we are in no small way about to really transform what it means to be human. So that's my world where access to basic healthcare has been an issue. With biotech, again, we can leapfrog. So a lot of the associated costs and infrastructure that we worry about are things that we could discuss leapfrogging because of exponential advancements in things like biotechnology. Eric Drexler. It's called Engines of Creation. Wonderful book and very apropos title because nanotechnology really does give us stewardship, right, over the engines of creation. As David Deutsch said, we are not the playthings of cosmic forces, we are the users of cosmic forces. See, with nanotechnology, we're talking about programming atoms, the way we program ones and zeros with digital technology. So when we're programming atoms, the physical world becomes a programmable medium. Think about it. It already exists in nature. When you plant a seed from a tree in the soil, you have to think of that seed as an information file that instructs the matter around it to grow into a tree. That's nanotechnology, software that writes its own hardware. And nanotechnology is also advancing exponentially. I suggest you guys Google nanomedicine and fall down that rabbit hole. So you have these three overlapping revolutions: genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics. AI, artificial intelligence, right? The continuing advancement of digital, compounding on itself exponentially. And so we have AI that is a billion times more intelligent than anything we can imagine. So these three overlapping revolutions point the way towards something kind of nebulous or beyond our cognitive capacity to grasp fully, right? We are like the ape before written language or spoken language. You know, we talk about how we're 98% similar to chimpanzees, but try to explain to a chimpanzee the elegance of a Pablo Neruda poem, you know, or reading a sonnet from Shakespeare. It's beyond their cognitive understanding. And some people say that that's kind of where we're at, right? These godlike technologies, but these Neolithic brains is a kind of cognitive dissonance. So what is needed here is really a mental preparation, a kind of dissolving of what came before, a moving beyond the been there's and seen that's of the adult mind, and an opening to new possibilities we can barely imagine. Perhaps we can learn from our children and their open sense of anything is possible, because truly anything is possible, and we are limited only by rigid patterns of thinking, right? By our adulting, the been there's and seen that's of the adult mind. And this next video tries to think that the future is the present and uses his work to prepare the grounds for it. Please show the next video.
So let's talk about the future of us. What does that even mean? The future of us. It's a look at what comes next. It's a look at what might be. Because today, exponentially emerging technologies are transforming what's possible. They're helping us overcome, transcend even biological limitations. The very rules of what it is to be human are up for grabs. We're rewriting the software of life with biotechnology. We're turning matter into a programmable medium with nanotechnology. We're creating sentient minds with artificial intelligence that are not bound by the limitations of biology. These three overlapping revolutions, PNR, genetic nanotechnology, and robotics, together will be leveraged to lead us towards a black hole-like, impossible to fathom singularity. It's like staring into the sun, a moment of a rousing symphonic climax when all of mind, leveraged and networked together, transcends its biological origins, and we become something more. People worry about the AIs and the them. Well, as Kurzweil says, that's going to be us. The future of us is ours to dream up.
You know, again, I think something very important to keep in mind here, all the money is flowing in this direction. In Silicon Valley, people get this. In the halls of the TED conference, people get this. But the larger public at large, right, doesn't necessarily get this. People think we're heading towards the end of the world. People tend to share two types of content. Scared, so fear propagates very well, or things that inspire awe. And I think, you know, the high road is wide open, the low road is crowded. So that's really what I'm trying to do with these videos, is to give these technologies, to give these emerging trends a storytelling spin, because we are storytelling animals. We respond to narratives, right? The beginning of a personal crisis is when the story that you tell yourself about yourself is no longer convincing or self-serving. A story, a self-story that has metastasized into one that is like self-destructive. And so we need to like shed our old skin, right? We need to be willing to craft new narratives for humanity, right? We call that leadership. We call that visioneering. What is a visionary? Right? Somebody who paints a portrait of what might be. And it's not pulling it out of their ass, but who is looking at the data and making data-driven extrapolations, right? People like Ray Kurzweil, people like Peter Diamandis, people like the folks at Singularity University, and other optimists around the planet. Now, another exciting space that is ripe for trends, el Internet de las Cosas. No doubt you've heard of this buzzword. We'll talk about the fourth industrial revolution and the Internet of Things. So what is the Internet of Things? Well, in a nutshell, as exponential advances continue to shrink sensors or computation down to smaller and smaller and smaller devices, it makes it affordable all of a sudden and practical to put these miniature devices into everyday objects. So the Internet of Things is when connectivity goes beyond the computer and beyond the phone into everything, everyday objects. Your refrigerator, obviously we're seeing with cars, the rise of Tesla. My good friend Kevin Kelly, who co-founded Wired magazine, he wrote the book What Technology Wants. And he describes technology as a kind of, he calls it the technium. And he said that technology is the seventh kingdom of life. And then one of the things he says is that what we're seeing with the Internet of Things is akin to what we saw when we harnessed electricity. So when we harnessed electricity, we electrified the planet very quickly, right? Created a kind of global nervous system. Well, now, with Internet of Things, we are cognitizing the planet, right? So first we electrified it, and now we're putting cognition everywhere. So now we're like, first it was just electrifying it, and now it's like a nervous system with real-time feedback loops. So what that means is this membrane, right, everything talks to everything else. And when everything talks to everything else, as Eric Davis says, matter becomes mind, right? Because when everything is linked with everything else, matter becomes mind. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, it means that we start to live in a world that responds increasingly to our needs and that even anticipates our needs. A world that orients itself around our tastes and preferences. A world in which all of us experience what a president experiences, where he walks around with like his 12 staffers that are all taking care of stuff and you can delegate everything. Like, imagine a swarm of AI surrounding you everywhere you go, and an experience of the world that becomes increasingly magical and intuitive. Everywhere you go, everything you need, a la carte and on demand, quality. Similar to our indigenous ancestors and their relationship with nature. Indigenous ancestors had a relationship with nature in which nature spoke to them, right? The clouds spoke and the trees spoke. There was this animism, right? Well, with the Internet of Things, we're bringing animism back. Everything will talk to us. Everything has agency. And the creative and commercial possibilities there to transport the human experience to realms that are far more interesting, engaging, intuitive, the future of wellness, the future of mental health, all this stuff we can totally play with by creating these very interesting immersive worlds on the back of connectivity everywhere, built, customized around every individual.
Increasingly used trendy term, the Internet of Things, and how game-changing it's going to be as we extend sensors, miniature sensors, into everyday objects. Everyday objects will start to give us real-time feedback, and the world essentially will come alive. This is the Internet of Things. What if we evolve the term a little further? What if instead of the Internet of Things, we enter the realm of the intelligence of things? The intelligence of things is where the Internet of Things meets artificial intelligence. Because the future of artificial intelligence is senseless unless we extend it into the world of everyday objects. This idea that as we impregnate intelligence into the world of physical things that we inhabit, the world essentially will come alive. This real-time feedback, this interface that will become enlivened with intelligence will essentially will birth a world that will increasingly talk back to us. Now, how this will change human subjectivity, how this will change the human condition, the space of mind in which we dwell, is in the following way. Increasingly, we'll dovetail our minds to the world, right? And as the world starts talking back, the distinction between self and world will start to disappear. The external space, the external world will increasingly start to feel like an extension of our mind, like an extension of our agency, which will bleed over into a world of predictability, a world that will know what we want before we want, a world of serendipity, a world in which you look for something, you find something else, and you realize that what you found was more conducive to your needs than what you thought you were looking for. We're talking about a world optimized for human creativity and human enterprise, a world that is responsive, a world that is alive, a world that is intelligent. As I imagine, so it becomes, and this is the very essence of magic. Now, you're pumping all this data, you're pumping all this AI into sensors, into the world of everyday objects, and again, you birth a world, the intelligence of things. The mind will have fully turned itself inside out. We will be inhabiting the condensation of human imagination. The nodes in our brain, the neurons will have spilled out into the world. We will cloak the planet in mind and data. This, my friends, is a singularity of mind and meaning. When everything becomes linked with everything else, matter becomes mind. This is the intelligence of things.
You know, one of the biggest things to give people information, I want to give them the felt experience of the implications behind this information. Essentially, I want to give people an experience of awe, an emotional experience that expands their perceptions. And there's been some research as of late in positive psychology circles, places in Berkeley and Stanford, on the subject of awe, el asombro, I don't know how you say it in Portuguese, but it turns out they describe asombro or awe as an experience of such perceptual expansion or such perceptual vastness that your mental models of the world, right? That inner modeling that you create when you go from a child to an adult, and you create this inner model of the world, and then you live inside that model and you reality test it on a daily basis, but you're basically living in your own maps. But an experience of awe forces you into a state of accommodation to allow this new data to come in, right? Or seeing the Amazon for the first time, or astronauts when they go into orbit, they experience something called the overview effect when they get to see the Earth from space. Like actually the felt experience of seeing everything you know and everything you are, that blue marble floating in the infinite. It's a real cognitive shift. It's very similar to what happens when people undergo a psychedelic experience. I don't have to tell you about the increased popularity of ayahuasca tourism in Brazil, increasing amounts of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. What are they looking for? Really, they're looking to dissolve and disrupt their mental models of reality that no longer serve them, their limiting beliefs, the patterns of thinking that have now enslaved them from being able to see something beyond their own perceptions. And they are undergoing experiences that dissolve all of that so that some new, hopefully piercing vision can emerge. It's very similar to the idea of the territory beyond the maps. Growing up, you're a child, all new territory. Your eyes are wide open, right? And they've done fMRI scans on people who take LSD and babies. And it turns out that people who are on LSD are seeing the world like babies do. So babies don't have maps. It's all new territory. And as you become an adult, the way your brain saves energy, right, or becomes efficient is to create maps so that you can drive to work and remember the way to work and be thinking about other stuff, such as linear thinking in an exponential world. The problem with that is that it robs you of learning new information, like really experiential, what they call knowledge by acquaintance. You can grab a depressed person and tell them, there's all these other ways to see the world, but knowledge by description will not do. People need knowledge by acquaintance. They need to experience some of the territory beyond their maps. Another way, it might be a piece of media that shakes your entire worldview and sends you down the rabbit hole. And that's my attempt behind these videos. It doesn't matter if I'm talking about innovation or technology, because what I'm really talking about is the evolution of human consciousness, right? Because again, we have Neolithic brains and godlike technology. That's what Edward O. Wilson wrote, right? Paleolithic brains, medieval laws, and godlike technology. That does not work. So we need to upgrade human consciousness. We need a collective and massive and planetary awakening. We need an overview effect experience like the astronauts get for everyone. How do we democratize the overview effect, right? How do we do it? Is it through virtual reality? I have some friends who made a virtual reality film in a refugee camp in Syria and then brought it to the United Nations and had UN diplomats put on the headgear and instantly be transported to a refugee camp. Knowledge by acquaintance versus knowledge by experience. Very different thing, right? Because empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. Empathy rarely extends beyond what we can see. But if we can expand what we can see, we can expand our sense of empathy. Consciousness. I shot it with a smartphone, and the video is a celebration of a meme put out there by Singularity University and other people about redefining what it means to be a billionaire in an age of exponential change, right? So in the recent decade, it's become trendy to like, I want to create a startup, become a unicorn, become a billionaire, you know? But how much more interesting if we redefine the term completely, right? Because we're social beings and we're all looking for social proof and social acceptance. So right now it's like, yeah, you become rich and everybody approves of you and validates you. But what if a billionaire in the age of exponential tech was to positively touch 1 billion people? You know, what if a millionaire is to positively touch 1 million people? And that could be, you know, an algorithm, a startup, an app, a piece of media that goes viral. But what a wonderful aspiration, because I'm sure you'll make money too. But the point is, exponentials allow us to aspire to have a kind of reach and a kind of impact that seems beyond our limiting beliefs. I had zero marketing budget for any of these videos. Like, when you consider doing Brain Games, which was a show backed by National Geographic Channel with their muscle and their marketing around the world, and then these videos that I was doing with my close friends mostly and distributing on YouTube, and I get recognized across the world, stopped on the street much more by these videos than by Brain Games. These videos have received hundreds and hundreds of millions of views across all platforms with no marketing budget whatsoever. That is the reach that each of us has. That is what's possible on the back of aspiring to positively touch as many people as possible. And that's the invitation that I have for you guys today. So this next video is called The Captains of Spaceship Earth, shot with a smartphone, attempting to redefine what it means to be a billionaire. I hope you like it. Next video.
Exponential technological advancement. What this literally means is that we have new construction kits for our reality, new tools with which to probe at the adjacent possible. So consider the implications, right? As Marshall McLuhan used to say, first we build the tools, and then the tools build us. We are designed by what we have designed. There are these feedback loops of mind, tool, and world that radically redefine our boundaries, that radically transform what it means to be human. To be human today is to crisscross the skies. To be human today is to create technosocial wormholes, mind-to-mind communication, overcome the limits of time, space, and distance. And so what do? Well, we need to radically reach out to one another in ways that we haven't before. There's a great line that says empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. In other words, if it's out of sight, it is out of mind. But if anything, these wireless communication technologies are radically extending our line of sight. They're providing new ontological maps of the real. They're giving us the astronaut overview effect. We are seeing the big picture. We are seeing that we are captains of spaceship Earth. And what shall we do? We need to extend our hands to one another. We've never had such tools to overcome all of the limitations of our humanity. We have the power, we have the will, we have the capacity, the creative capacity to overcome our limits. And so today, billions of us linking to one another, creating a global node, a global brain. What is the new definition of billionaire? The new definition of billionaire is he who will positively affect the lives of a billion people. He or she will reach out and say, I will positively affect the lives of a billion people. This should be our goal. This is our responsibility. Here's our chance.
So, yeah, I want you guys to aspire to this kind of impact. I was in Brazil in less than a year, and I already have 2 more invitations for this year, one in June and one in November, and it just feels like there is an awakening happening across the planet. I've seen it from Dubai to South Africa to Mexico to Chile to Brazil, especially now, where people are waking up, right? And it's interesting, that word, awakening, because there seems to be a bifurcation between the people that are saying, oh, we need an awakening of human consciousness and wellness and meditation over here, and then over here, people that are just like, innovation, tech disruption, the bottom line, let's fix our economies. And so, as if these things were separate. They are not separate, right? The United Nations number recently came out that said that today, more people die by suicide than by all the armed conflict and natural disasters across the world combined. Think about that figure. So like all the war, all the terrorism, right? All the stuff happening in Yemen and hotspots around the world, tragic, no doubt. All the hurricanes, all those deaths, all that stuff, all those tragedies, less than the amount of people who are choosing to take their own lives, aside from Corona, right? And the viral epidemic is an epidemic or a crisis of meaning, a crisis of purpose, a crisis of disconnection, right? I mean, over here you have some people are so poor, all they have is money. Probably heard that line. The truth of the matter is that unless we come together around a grander narrative we won't be able to overcome the polarization that exists across the world. Now, what's interesting is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the work of Ernest Becker. Ernest Becker wrote a book called The Denial of Death. It's a great book. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and it's a distillation of the human condition, la condición humana. And basically explains that what covers human behavior above everything else, whether it's conscious or unconscious, is the fear of death. You know, other animals only fear death when there's a predator around. Human beings can be sitting in our fancy cushions in our fancy kingdom, and we'll still start thinking about how scary it is that one day we will die. And so we cling to meaning-making narratives or immortality myths, such as religion or romantic love, or, right, our creative capacity to impact the world in a positive way. These are immortality narratives that infuse our lives with meaning in the face of the meaninglessness of the fact that we all die in the end. Question. And one of the side effects of the internet is that it's a lot easier for you to question the dogma you've been raised with, because you have access to so many more perspectives and so much more information and so many more points of views that it can lead to a kind of fragmentation. And then people all of a sudden don't know what is the dominant myth to cling to. And when they don't know which myth to cling to, they'll cling to the closest one at hand, and they'll cling to it even more. So people, the polarization we're seeing today is actually a response to the fear of death. And people holding on to themselves and castigating the other as if it was a life or death thing. Because our beliefs are about life and death, because we are meaning-needing creatures. And so, this last video, to end my talk, is about the invitation hippie cliche, and I have not been drinking ayahuasca, I promise you, but we need a unifying narrative to bring us together. A unifying narrative. You know, you guys remember how inspiring the meme of Obama was when he first came online? You know, the whole "yes we can" thing? That resonated so beautiful. When was the last time a narrative has brought us together? And by the way, narratives have to be followed through with action. But the cool thing is that exponential technologies give us the resources to take the kind of action that makes a beautiful narrative that can change the world something we can actually actualize. And that's what this next video leaves you with. It's called A Call to Awakening. Please play the last video.
That humanity is suffering a kind of collective soul sickness. There is a global epidemic of existential distress. Numbers don't lie. Anxiety and depression is being diagnosed at levels we've never seen before. The United Nations, in fact, has said that 800,000 people a year now are committing suicide across the globe. That is a larger number than the amount of people who died from armed conflict and natural disasters combined. The question is whether this should surprise us. Perhaps our personal narratives, our collective cultural operating system, our cultural narratives about who and what we are have hit their limit. They are no longer serving us. I mean, at the end of the day, should this surprise us? The philosopher Tolstoy said that man cannot live without finding a way to bridge the finite with the infinite, right? Kafka said man cannot live without a continuous belief of something indestructible within himself, right? We need to commune with the eternal, with the cosmos, in order to impregnate our life with meaning and signification. Now, religion used to provide this narrative, provide this existential blanket, right? Blanketing us from the void by telling us we will live forever in the kingdom of God. But increasing sophistication, increasing scientific awareness and knowledge, and increasing intelligence has actually made us more anxious, because these old narratives are no longer serving us. I believe the epidemic of depression and anxiety and general malaise and meaninglessness comes from this unique awareness that we are mortal beings. But perhaps what we need is a different story. Perhaps what we need is a cognitive reframing. Something really funny happens to astronauts when they go into orbit. These are secular materialistic engineers. These guys, on the back of science and knowledge, cruise into the orbiting of the planet. All of a sudden they see the Earth as a single, solitary marble floating in the cosmos. They see everything they've ever known as just one thing. They see themselves and their planet as one. And this psychic transformation is known as the astronaut overview effect. Apparently, such a dramatic change in perspective, such a dramatic recontextualization of what we are changes us. And this ontological awareness gets rid of the feeling of meaninglessness and all of a sudden informs our whole phenomenological worldview with this idea that we are part of something greater than ourselves. Is a sense of noetic, ultimate truth that goes deeper than everyday reality, right? And in that moment, that poetic hijacking of awareness and understanding, that overview effect, changes these astronauts forever. So how do we give more of us this kind of experience? Do we willingly induce metaphysical, mystical experiences in the labs of psychiatry? Are we on the cusp of uncovering a telescope for psychiatry and for the mind? Are we going to take a knobs and levers approach to fundamentally change our awareness? Point being is we need a unary. We need to awaken to our true condition. We need to transcend our amnesis, which is the forgetting of the forgetting, and remember what we forgot. So this is a call to upgrade. This is a call to hack yourself. This is a call to become something more. We are a chrysalis about to turn into a butterfly. We are undergoing a metamorphosis and are about to spread our wings. We are not a cancer on our host planet. We are a fetus, and this is our birth canal. It may be bloody, it may be turbulent, but we can be reborn anew. We can come out of the other side, transformed, transcended. It is our birthright, it is our calling, it is beckoning, my friends. It's a call to awaken.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you.
We've been in a Love Fest on social media already for a while,
Yeah.
so it's nice to meet you in the flesh, bro.
Man, first of all, I would like to ask you something. Can you teach me to speak English like you? Do you think it's possible?
Anything is possible. I'm waiting for the moment where we can download a new language, like Neo in the Matrix downloads Kung Fu, and he's like, I know Kung Fu. I got lucky. My mother teaches literature, English literature. So even though yo me crié en Venezuela, I grew up in Caracas, Venezuela. I lived there
Oh, Spanish too, I was.
Sí, sí, no, yo viví en Venezuela hasta 18 años. I lived in Venezuela till I was 18, pero my mother raised me bilingual, o sea, con los dos lenguajes desde chiquito.
Okay, your voice is so good that I wanna.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Your voice is so good, so don't speak now.
Okay.
Relax your voice. It's a huge treasure. And I would like to take 2 minutes to share with you my 3-minute explanation of everything and more
Good.
that I've been working on. Inspired on your video shots of Aoi. My dream is to have it like that. With good words and good accent.
Great.
So I have a lot of
Great.
work to do. My 3-minute explanation of all suffering, of all trouble, is the root cause, is what I call illusion of separation.
Yes.
We went into an illusion that we were separated from each other. We forgot that Earth is an organism that in a big galaxy, and we are only cells of this organism. And when some cells start to not feel together, that's called cancer sometimes in other circumstances, because the cells start making shit. And once we went this illusion of separation, we decided to create a world in a linear way, because we didn't get the most important lesson from nature. We got a lot of lessons from nature, but the most important is the circular economy. That's the first lesson of nature, first.
Yeah.
Because what you plant, you take, you can plant other things, and we eat nature,
Yeah.
we shed,
Yeah.
it's fertilizer, so we eat again.
Yeah.
That's the circular economy.
Yeah.
And we didn't get this message. So we designed a world very linear I mean extract,
Yeah.
process, and garbage.
Yes.
So when you design the world in this linear way, extract, process, and garbage, you create a new reality that is based in illusion, so it's an illusion. That's the reality of scarcity. Because if you are separated, and we designed a linear process, so there won't be enough resources really. If this extract, process, garbage, there won't be enough resources, and we are separated for not enough resources, boom.
Yeah.
Scarcity. Comes competition. Separation, linearity process of production, then comes scarcity, so competition, so let's compete. So everything was designed based on competition, and if you could summarize everything in one word, I would say fear.
Yeah.
Because with competition, we're separated, and not enough resources, scarcity, competition, fear, as you said about the coronavirus, the fear of the situations getting more damaged than. So, what's the solution? That's the scenario, and the solution is to abundance, sustainability, circular economy, collaboration, and love. Thank you. I can do more hands. I can do.
Perfect.
I'll do more hands.
Yes,
too.
absolutely.
So we're gonna open for questions. I just would like to do a few questions, and then whoever wants, raise hands. I was thinking you're a good explanation.
Neurobiology and pharmacology, the 4 forces of ecstasy. And I really recommend the book Stealing Fire because it talks about how Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, the Navy SEALs, all these different worlds actually have been leveraging altered states of consciousness to boost performance. So it's not just like getting inspired for the pure pleasure of having the astronaut overview effect, but it's that certain altered states, particularly a flow state, the way the place where musicians go when they're in the zone, or basketball players when they get into the pocket. The flow state is something that can be mapped. And if you can create environments at work that create more flow, people have more purpose, people report being less fatigued, they're more inspired, and their performance and productivity levels go through the roof. So it's not just about like Burning Man, it's about bringing some of what happens there into the fetching water and the chopping wood of the day-to-day.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And what would you do if you were in their seat and now you come back to the office?
Yeah.
What would be your
Everybody in the office with one of my videos. Watch this, and we're going to have a town hall meeting, and we're going to talk about disruption, and we're going to encourage all the different employees to raise their hands and point out things that aren't happening, they're not working, and promise them that they're not going to be punished or fired for raising flags about things that need to be addressed. So I think giving people permission also, because there's a lot of a culture here of like, don't stick out or don't go against the prevailing narrative for fear of losing one's job. But I think we have to invite our employees to be co-participants, you know, because they have a stake, put a stake in the game, you know, and I think that's
great?
It's like a feature-length documentary. My friend Barry Ptolemy actually directed it, and it had some great buzz. It's a few years old now, but in terms of like sitting down and watching like a nice 2-hour film that really maps this out, that's a great documentary to start with for sure. Yeah. Right. And then all these videos are available online, so any of this stuff as well. Not to self-promote or anything.
Who else?
Geographic as well. Fantastic show, but that one
It's more about planet
it's about the planet and expanding our consciousness about the interconnection. Actually, we did a show on National Geographic after Brain Games called Origins. And I'm a big fan of history, right? Because zooming out, seeing how far we've come and how fast we've gotten here gives us a great perspective over the present. So I recommend that show as well. Origins, The Journey of Humankind on National Geographic.
Because we want to give them to us, our children, our partners. What do you say about that?
Well, that's other families don't count as much, or possession. And look, I can understand that. I've been in love, but I don't want to share my girlfriend, you know. But I do think there's a move towards a return to community. You know, some people like to glorify that in the past, everything, you know, it took a village. You raised children with the village. There were a lot of things that were messed up in the past too, you know, but I think there's a desire for societies where we feel more of a sense of connection and belonging. And for that, it might mean all of us to be more invested in the common good rather than just invested in our own personal gain. but not at the expense of our own personal gain. You know, the ego is not always bad. The ego gets the book written. The ego drives an individual to distinguish himself and to develop and cultivate his gifts that then he can share with the community. I'm not advocating a return to squashing individualism in favor of just the collective, because that becomes very easily corruptible and becomes the Soviet Union all over again. So I love individuality, but I also love the South African saying, Ubuntu, I am because you are. So how do we move towards, you know, win or lose scenarios to like omni-win-win scenarios? There's a great book by James Carse called The Infinite Game, or Finite and Infinite Games. He said finite games are played to win or lose, but infinite games are played to keep the game going. And so that's a great like philosophical lens to see it, how this plays out in sort of practical measures. There's a lot of experiments. Burning Man is an experiment. You know, 70,000 people come into the roughest environment in the world to create a week of a gift economy, and everybody comes to share their gifts that they've cultivated as individuals and work together, and in an atmosphere of like open love and a lot of nakedness. It's an interesting thing, you know. But I'm not saying that's the end all be all, but I'm saying an openness to explore. You know, I love what I see in countries like the Netherlands as well. You know, these are countries that have that semi-controversial thing where it's like, are they like socialist democracies? Look, I'm not about to start defending corrupt socialism. Look what happened in Venezuela, not at all. But there does have a feeling in countries like the Netherlands where community matters. People raise their kids in the commons, not just behind the walls of their house. And so how do you create a society where the commons is a space we can all enjoy that still creates the individual abundance that people might want? Because that's cool too.
Like 300 videos on YouTube, right?
Oh yeah, so many. Facebook, Instagram, everywhere.
Shorts of Aoi, shorts of Aoi. So they really gave, choose 5 videos, watch 30, 40, choose 5, put the team, and great discussion can happen.
Yes,
cheap strategy, don't have to pay him.
Obrigado. Uma salva de palmas, Jason Silva. Thank you. Obrigado a todos. Valeu, obrigado.